The evening started like any other at the Golden Palm, one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Soft lighting from crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and polished silverware. The gentle hum of conversation mixed with the occasional clink of fine china and crystal glasses. In the center of the main dining room stood a magnificent grand piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a 1920s Steinway Model D concert grand, its black surface gleaming under the lights, brass pedals catching occasional glints of gold. The instrument was both decoration and occasional entertainment, though most patrons were too absorbed in their business deals and social climbing to truly appreciate its presence. James Harrington arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, as he did every Thursday evening. The maitre d' noticed him immediately. It was impossible not to. At 56, Harrington carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built an empire from nothing. His tailored suit probably cost more than what most of the staff earned in 3 months. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly trimmed, not a strand out of place. "Mr. Harrington, welcome back," the maitre d' said with a practiced smile. "Your usual table is ready." Harrington nodded curtly. Words of gratitude were rare from him. He expected excellence as a baseline, not something deserving special acknowledgement. He followed the maitre d' to his preferred spot, a corner table that offered both privacy and a clear view of the entire restaurant. It was also positioned perfectly to appreciate the grand piano, which Harrington himself had donated to the restaurant 5 years ago. Few people knew the story behind that donation. The piano had once belonged to Harrington's mother, who had dreamed of being a concert pianist but had given up that dream to raise her family. After her passing, Harrington couldn't bear to keep the instrument in his empty penthouse, yet couldn't bring himself to sell it either. The donation had been his compromise, a way to honor her memory while maintaining some distance from the pain it represented. As Harrington settled into his seat, his business associates began to arrive. Tonight's dinner was more than just a meal. It was the final discussion before closing a deal worth billions. His company was preparing to acquire a struggling competitor, a move that would eliminate thousands of jobs but would increase his company's market share significantly. The restaurant's exclusive atmosphere made it the perfect setting for such conversations, expensive enough to impress, private enough to discuss sensitive matters. On the other side of the dining room, Mia Chen tied her apron with practiced hands. At 24, she had already worked more jobs than most people would in a lifetime. Currently, she balanced 3: morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening waitressing at the Golden Palm, and weekend tutoring for high school students struggling with math and science. All of it to keep her younger brother and sister in college after their parents' accident 2 years ago had left the family with mounting medical bills and no breadwinners. "Table 6 is yours tonight," the head waiter told her, not looking up from his clipboard. "And 12, 15, and 20. Remember, we have VIPs in tonight, so everything must be perfect." Mia nodded, her face serious. Of course. She had been working at the Golden Palm for only 3 months, but she had quickly earned a reputation for efficiency and professionalism. What her coworkers didn't know was how much she loved being around the piano. During slow afternoons, when the restaurant was nearly empty and the management wasn't looking, she would sometimes brush her fingers across the keys, playing quiet melodies that reminded her of home. Her grandfather had taught her to play when she was just 5 years old. They couldn't afford a piano, so he had drawn a keyboard on a piece of cardboard, and they practiced finger positions on that makeshift instrument. It wasn't until she was 10 that she touched a real piano at her school. By then, her fingers knew exactly what to do, as if they had been playing on a real instrument all along. The first hour of her shift passed smoothly. Mia moved between her tables with quiet efficiency, balancing plates and remembering specific requests without needing to write them down. She had a gift for anticipating needs: fresh water before glasses emptied, extra napkins for messy eaters, a discreet reminder about an appointment for the guest who kept checking his watch. At 8:45, a new party was seated at table 15, one of hers. 4 men in expensive suits already deep in conversation about market projections and quarterly reports. Mia approached with a professional smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Golden Palm. May I tell you about our specials tonight?" The oldest man in the group, Harrington, barely glanced at her as he waved his hand dismissively. "Just bring us your best bottle of Bordeaux." The 82, if you have it, Mia nodded. Of course, sir. Would you like to order appetizers now, or would you prefer some time with the menus? Give us 10 minutes, another man said, this one at least acknowledging her existence with a brief smile. As Mia went to fetch the wine, she couldn't help noticing how the older man kept glancing at the piano between conversation points. There was something in his expression when he looked at it, a softness that contradicted his otherwise stern demeanor. She recognized that look. It was how her grandfather looked at old photographs of her grandmother. The evening grew busier. The restaurant filled to capacity, the noise level rising as alcohol loosened tongues and lowered inhibitions. Mia found herself moving faster, weaving between tables with practiced grace. She was carrying a tray with 4 appetizers for another table when a group of laughing guests pushed back their chairs to leave, forcing her to sidestep quickly. The movement sent her slightly off balance. To steady herself, she reached out with her free hand, her fingers accidentally brushing against the piano keys as she passed. 3 notes rang out, a discordant, accidental chord that seemed to cut through the restaurant noise like a knife. The sound wasn't particularly loud, but somehow it caused a ripple of silence to spread from that corner of the room. Or perhaps it was the reaction of James Harrington that caught everyone's attention. His head had snapped up at the sound, his conversation forgotten mid-sentence. His eyes locked on Mia with an intensity that could have burned through steel. For a moment, everything seemed frozen in time. Mia stood with her tray still perfectly balanced, her face flushing with embarrassment. Harrington remained motionless, his wine glass halfway to his lips. Then, deliberately, he placed his glass down and stood up. You, he said, his voice cutting through the now hushed restaurant. What do you think you're doing? Mia swallowed hard. I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident. I was just trying to... Do you have any idea what that instrument is worth? Harrington's voice was controlled, but with an unmistakable edge of anger. That is a concert Grand Steinway, not some toy to be pawed at by the staff. The heads of nearby diners turned toward the confrontation. Mia felt her chest tighten as every eye in the restaurant seemed to focus on her. She carefully set down her tray on an empty service table, not trusting her suddenly trembling hands. I apologize, sir, she said again, keeping her voice steady despite her humiliation. It truly was an accident. I was trying to avoid bumping into the departing guests. Harrington stepped away from his table, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. His business associates exchanged uncomfortable glances but remained seated. That piano, Harrington said, his voice lower now but somehow more intense, is not just an expensive decoration. It is a piece of history. It has been played by hands far more worthy than yours. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The maitre d' began moving toward them, sensing a situation that needed diffusing, but he was across the room and moving cautiously. Perhaps, Harrington continued, now standing just a few feet from Mia, you should consider whether this establishment is the right fit for someone with your level of care and attention. The implication was clear. He was suggesting she should be fired for touching a piano, for 3 accidental notes. Mia felt a flush of something new cutting through her embarrassment, anger. She had spent years being polite to people who looked through her as if she were invisible. She had smiled and nodded as customers complained about trivial matters while she worried about how to pay for her sister's textbooks. She had swallowed her pride countless times because she needed the job, needed the tips, needed every dollar she could earn. But something about this man's cold eyes and dismissive tone sparked a courage she didn't know she had. With all due respect, sir, she said quietly, it was an accident, and while I understand the piano is valuable, I don't believe an accidental touch deserves this kind of reaction. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had paused, peering through the service doors. No one spoke to James Harrington that way, especially not a waitress. The silence in the restaurant hung heavy as a storm cloud. Harrington's eyes narrowed, not used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered so far beneath his station. His business associates at the table shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension building like electricity before lightning strikes. I don't think you understand your position here, Harrington said, his voice dangerously quiet. That piano is worth more than you would earn in 10 years. Perhaps more than you'll earn in your lifetime. Mia felt her throat tighten. Her momentary courage wavered under his cold stare. But she held her ground. 6 tables away, a wine glass clinked against a plate, the sound sharp in the unnatural quiet. "I understand completely, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I respect the value of the instrument, but I also believe in basic human decency, regardless of someone's net worth or job title." A few gasps came from nearby tables. Nobody spoke to James Harrington this way. Not employees, not business rivals, sometimes not even equals. The restaurant manager finally arrived at the scene, his face a mask of professional concern hiding absolute terror. "Mr. Harrington, please accept our deepest apologies for any inconvenience," he said, placing himself slightly between Harrington and Mia. "I assure you this matter will be addressed immediately." He shot Mia a look that clearly said, "Shut up if you want to keep your job." But Harrington wasn't finished. "Do you know why that piano is here?" he asked, ignoring the manager completely, his eyes still fixed on Mia. "It's not just decoration. That piano belonged to my mother." Something in his voice changed when he mentioned his mother, a barely perceptible crack in the armor of arrogance. Mia noticed it, though others might have missed it. "She played beautifully," Harrington continued. "She could have performed at Carnegie Hall, but she gave it up to raise a family. To raise me, that piano was her most treasured possession." For a brief moment, Mia saw something human flicker across his face. Pain, perhaps even grief. But it disappeared as quickly as it had come, replaced by the cold mask of privilege and power. "So, you'll understand why I don't appreciate seeing it treated carelessly by someone who clearly doesn't recognize its significance." The restaurant remained unnaturally quiet. Even the kitchen sounds had died down as staff paused to listen to the confrontation. Mia became acutely aware of every eye on her, the other servers, the guests, the businessmen at Harrington's table. Her job hung by a thread, but something deeper was at stake too. Her dignity. "I understand the piano has personal meaning to you," she said carefully. "And that makes your reaction more understandable. But it was still an accident, sir. I would never intentionally disrespect something so valuable, either monetarily or sentimentally." The manager cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion in private. Mia, why don't you take a break and—" "No," Harrington cut him off. "I'm not finished." He turned his attention back to Mia. "Tell me, what exactly is your role here? To serve food and drinks, correct? Not to touch valuable instruments, not to talk back to guests, and certainly not to lecture me about decency." His voice had risen slightly, drawing even more attention from the surrounding tables. A woman with diamond earrings the size of grapes leaned toward her companion and whispered something behind her hand. A businessman 2 tables over was recording the confrontation discreetly on his phone. Mia felt heat rising to her cheeks, the humiliation threatening to overwhelm her. But she thought of her siblings, of the bills waiting to be paid, of her grandfather who had taught her to always stand tall even when the world tried to shrink her. "My role," she said with quiet dignity, "is to provide excellent service to all guests. It's also to be treated with basic respect as all humans deserve to be." One of Harrington's business associates, a younger man with kind eyes, cleared his throat. "James, perhaps we should return to our discussion. The market projections for next quarter." "In a moment, Paul," Harrington said without turning around. His eyes remained fixed on Mia. "I'm curious now. You speak as if you have some education. What's someone like you doing waiting tables?" The question was delivered with such casual cruelty that several people winced. The implication was clear. Someone like you. Someone lesser. Someone who doesn't belong in places where people like me dine. Mia felt a flash of anger, but she channeled it into something cooler, more controlled. "Someone like me, sir? You mean someone who works hard? Someone who values both their own dignity and the dignity of others? Or did you mean something else?" A few patrons shifted in their seats. One woman at a nearby table nodded almost imperceptibly. Harrington's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by service staff. "I meant someone who clearly has opinions about how the world should work, yet finds herself serving others for tips." The manager stepped forward again, desperation clear on his face. "Mr. Harrington, please allow me to—" "I wait tables," Mia interrupted, addressing Harrington directly. "Because I'm putting my younger brother and sister through college after our parents were injured in an accident 2 years ago. I have a degree in music theory that I earned on scholarship, but family comes first." So yes, I serve food for tips and I'm proud of the work I do. Her voice didn't waver, though her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Somewhere in the restaurant someone began to applaud softly, but quickly stopped when Harrington's cold gaze swept the room. A degree in music theory, Harrington repeated, his tone making it clear what he thought of such an impractical education. And yet you handle a priceless instrument as if it were a toy. It was an accident, Mia repeated, her patience wearing thin. And with all due respect, sir, I've spent enough time around pianos to know how to handle them properly. Have you? Harrington's eyebrows rose. Please enlighten us all about your extensive experience with concert grand pianos. The mockery in his voice was unmistakable. Several diners looked down at their plates, embarrassed by the display of cruelty. Others watched with the same detached interest they might show a reality TV show, uncomfortable but unable to look away. Before Mia could respond, there was a movement at the back of the restaurant. An elderly man who had been dining alone in a quiet corner slowly rose to his feet. He was thin, with stooped shoulders and a shock of white hair, wearing a suit that had once been fine but now showed signs of age and wear. He made his way toward the piano with slow, deliberate steps, leaning slightly on a wooden cane. The manager looked even more alarmed. Sir, please, if you could return to your seat. The old man ignored him completely. He continued his slow journey until he stood beside the piano, running one gnarled hand lovingly across its polished surface. A Steinway Model D, he said, his voice accented but clear. Serial number 234578, built in 1923, one of the finest examples from that period. He looked up at Harrington. You have excellent taste, sir. Harrington seemed taken aback both by the interruption and by the old man's knowledge. You're familiar with this instrument? The old man smiled slightly. I am familiar with many pianos. I have played them all my life. He turned to Mia, his eyes twinkling with something that might have been pride. And you, young lady? You said you have a degree in music theory? Mia nodded, uncertain where this was going. Yes, sir. From which institution, if I may ask? Eastman School of Music, she replied. On scholarship. A murmur ran through the restaurant. Eastman was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Even Harrington seemed momentarily thrown off balance. The old man's smile widened. Excellent program, rigorous, not for the faint of heart or the marginally talented. He turned back to Harrington. You know, young man, I have found in my many years that true talent often hides in the most unexpected places. Behind aprons, beneath calloused hands, within those who serve rather than those being served. Harrington's expression darkened. And you are? The old man straightened slightly, some hidden strength seeming to flow into his frail frame. My name is Anton Petrov. Perhaps you have heard of me. Another murmur, louder this time, swept through the restaurant. Even Harrington's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Anton Petrov had once been one of the most celebrated concert pianists in the world. His recordings of Rachmaninoff and Chopin still considered definitive by many critics. But he had disappeared from the public eye nearly 15 years ago, after a series of personal tragedies and health issues. Mr. Petrov, Harrington said, his tone noticeably more respectful. Of course. Your recording of Rachmaninoff's Third is unparalleled. I had no idea you were dining here tonight. Petrov nodded acknowledgement of the compliment. I keep a low profile these days. He glanced at Mia, his eyes warm. But I still recognize talent when I see it. Or when I hear about it. The restaurant had fallen completely silent again, but now the silence held a different quality. Anticipation rather than discomfort. Everyone sensed that something unexpected was unfolding before them. Petrov turned to Mia fully now. Tell me, my dear, do you still play? Or has life forced that joy aside for more practical concerns? Mia swallowed hard. I still play when I can, though I don't have regular access to a piano these days. Petrov nodded thoughtfully, then turned back to Harrington. You were concerned about someone touching this fine instrument. May I ask, do you play yourself? Harrington's jaw tightened again. No, as I mentioned, it was my mother's. I keep it for sentimental reasons and to honor her memory. A noble gesture, Petrov said with a small nod. But you know, the greatest dishonor to a fine instrument is not an accidental touch. He paused, his eyes twinkling again. It's silence. Petrov's words hung in the air. The greatest dishonor to a fine instrument is silence. Harrington stood motionless, clearly caught off guard by both the old man's presence and his gentle rebuke. The restaurant remained hushed, the evening's drama now more compelling than any meal. "Mr. Petrov," Harrington finally said, recovering some of his composure, "while I appreciate your expertise, this is between me and the management regarding a staff issue." Petrov smiled slightly. "Is it? It seemed to involve a piano, something I know a bit about, and a young musician being humiliated for an accident." He glanced around the restaurant. Quite publicly, I might add. Mia felt a rush of gratitude toward the old man, but also embarrassment at becoming the center of such a scene. The manager hovered nearby, eyes darting between Harrington and Petrov like a tennis spectator at a particularly tense match. "Perhaps," Petrov continued, his voice gentle but firm, "we might turn this unfortunate incident into something more positive." He turned to Mia. "Young lady, would you be willing to demonstrate your skills on this beautiful instrument? I believe it might help put everyone at ease." Mia's eyes widened in shock. "Here? Now?" She glanced at the manager, whose expression had shifted from terror to confusion. "I don't think that would be appropriate," Harrington cut in sharply. "As I said, that piano is a family heirloom, not a prop for restaurant entertainment." Petrov raised one bushy white eyebrow. "An heirloom kept in public, yet untouched? Like keeping a fine wine sealed forever, never to be tasted." He shook his head sadly. "Your mother was a pianist, you said. Would she have wanted her instrument to remain silent, gathering dust beneath its polish?" A flash of something, perhaps pain, perhaps doubt, crossed Harrington's face. One of his dinner companions, sensing his discomfort, attempted to intervene. "James, perhaps we should return to our discussion. The merger paperwork needs—" "Not now, Paul," Harrington said quietly, his eyes still on Petrov. The old man held his gaze steadily. "Your mother played beautifully, you said. Music was her passion before she set it aside for family. Tell me, would she have scolded a young musician for accidentally brushing against keys? Or would she have encouraged talent wherever she found it?" Harrington's jaw tightened. The question had struck a nerve, touching something deeper than pride or property. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. "You speak as if you knew her." Petrov smiled gently. "I did not have that honor. But I know musicians. Their souls speak a common language across time and circumstance." A few tables away, someone whispered, "Is that really Anton Petrov?" Another voice answered, "It can't be. He disappeared years ago." Petrov either didn't hear the whispers or chose to ignore them. His focus remained on Harrington. The confrontation now transformed into something more complex than a dispute between a wealthy patron and a waitress. "There is something else you should know," Petrov said, his voice dropping slightly so that people at nearby tables leaned forward to hear. "Something that might help you understand my interest in this situation." He turned toward Mia, who stood frozen in place, her serving tray still balanced on the empty table beside her. "Mia Chen is my granddaughter." The revelation rippled through the restaurant. Heads turned, glances were exchanged, and a low murmur of conversation began to rise. Harrington's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise, then to something harder to read. "Your granddaughter," he repeated flatly. Mia herself seemed as shocked as anyone. "Grandpa, I didn't know you were coming tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" Petrov's eyes twinkled. "And miss the look on your face right now. Besides, I wanted to see you in your natural environment, working hard as always." His expression softened with pride, just as your mother did, and her mother before her. Harrington glanced between them, clearly reassessing the situation. "I wasn't aware of your connection," he said carefully. "Few are," Petrov replied. "My Mia doesn't use her connection to me to open doors. She insists on making her own way." He looked at his granddaughter with undisguised affection, sometimes to my frustration. "The world would be kinder to you if you used the Petrov name, my dear." Mia shook her head slightly. "That's not who I am, Grandpa. You know that." The restaurant manager, who had been watching the exchange with growing amazement, finally found his voice. "Mr. Petrov, it's an honor to have you dining with us. Had we known, you would have treated me differently." Petrov finished for him. "Given me the best table, perhaps comped my meal, made a fuss. And that's precisely why I didn't announce myself." He turned back to Harrington. "Just as it's why Mia doesn't use my name to get special treatment." Harrington was silent for a moment, his businessman's mind visibly recalculating the situation. When he spoke again, his tone had changed completely. "Mr. Petrov, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Had you known she was my granddaughter, you would have treated her with respect?" Petrov interrupted, his voice suddenly sharp despite his frail appearance. "That's precisely the problem, isn't it? We reserve our best behavior for those we think deserve it, based on name or wealth or position." He shook his head, but kindness should not be conditional on pedigree. A woman at a nearby table nodded in agreement, no longer bothering to hide her interest in the conversation. Others were watching openly now, the restaurant's usual hum of private conversations replaced by collective attention to the drama unfolding before them. Harrington, unused to being lectured, especially in public, stiffened slightly. "I meant no disrespect. I simply value my mother's piano and reacted when I thought it was being treated carelessly." "I understand," Petrov said, his voice gentle again. "We all have things we treasure, memories we protect." He glanced at Mia. "I treasure my granddaughter and her siblings. I protect their dignity, even when they don't ask me to." He took a step closer to Harrington, lowering his voice. "Do you know why Mia works 3 jobs? After her parents, my daughter and son-in-law, were injured in an accident, the medical bills nearly destroyed them. Insurance covered only a fraction. Mia put her promising music career on hold to ensure her younger siblings could stay in college." Harrington's expression shifted again, something like discomfort flashing across his features. "She works here in the evenings," Petrov continued. "Mornings at a coffee shop. Weekends tutoring mathematics, another subject at which she excels. All while practicing piano whenever she can find one available." Pride filled his voice. She was offered a full scholarship for graduate studies at Juilliard last year. She turned it down to care for her family. The restaurant had grown so quiet that the soft ticking of a waiter's watch could be heard at the far end of the room. Harrington looked at Mia with new eyes, seeing beyond the uniform for the first time. "I wasn't aware of your circumstances," he said, his voice softer than before. Mia straightened her shoulders. "My circumstances don't change anything, Mr. Harrington. An accident is still an accident, and everyone deserves basic respect regardless of their story." Petrov smiled at his granddaughter, pride evident in his expression. "You see, this is why I am proud. Not just her talent, but her heart." He turned back to Harrington. "Now about that demonstration I suggested." Harrington hesitated, glancing at the piano, then back at Petrov and Mia. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. He could insist on his original position and lose face, or he could relent and perhaps gain something unexpected. "Very well," he finally said. "I would be interested to hear Ms. Chen play." He gestured toward the piano with a stiff nod. The manager, sensing the tension beginning to dissolve, jumped in. "What a wonderful idea. A special performance for our guests this evening." Mia shook her head. "I'm on shift." "I have tables to—" "I'll cover your tables," another waitress said, stepping forward. She was a young woman with kind eyes who had been watching the confrontation unfold. "This I've got to see." Petrov took his granddaughter's hand and led her toward the piano. Mia followed reluctantly, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and anticipation. It had been months since she'd played on an instrument of this quality. As they approached the piano, Petrov ran his hand lovingly over its surface. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Your mother had excellent taste," he added, glancing at Harrington. He pulled out the bench and gestured for Mia to sit. She hesitated, looking down at her waitress uniform, then at the expectant faces now turned toward her from around the restaurant. "I don't know, Grandpa," she whispered. "What should I play?" Petrov smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Why not the piece we've been working on? The one you play when you visit me on Sunday afternoons." Mia's eyes widened. "Rachmaninoff? That's too ambitious for this setting. Maybe something simpler like, 'Nothing is too ambitious for you,'" Petrov said firmly. "Besides," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "I think Mr. Harrington might appreciate hearing what that piece sounds like on his mother's piano." Harrington had moved closer, watching the exchange with undisguised curiosity. At the mention of Rachmaninoff, his eyebrows rose slightly. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, Petrov explained, noting Harrington's reaction. "My granddaughter has been working on it for some time." "It was your mother's favorite, perhaps?" Harrington nodded slowly, surprise evident on his face. "Yes, how did you know?" Petrov smiled mysteriously. A fortunate guess. Or perhaps the piano itself told me. Instruments remember the music they've played, you know? Mia took a deep breath and positioned herself on the bench, adjusting its height with practiced movements. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment as she closed her eyes, gathering herself. The restaurant held its collective breath. The moment Mia's fingers touched the keys, something in the atmosphere of the restaurant changed. Her first notes were gentle, almost hesitant, a quiet introduction that nonetheless commanded attention. Conversation ceased mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye turned toward the young woman in the waitress uniform seated at the grand piano. Harrington stood motionless, his expression unreadable as he watched Mia's hands move across the keyboard. The opening bars of Rachmaninoff's third piano concerto filled the room, tentative at first, like the first raindrops before a storm. Then, as she gained confidence, the music began to swell. Petrov stood beside the piano, his eyes closed, one hand resting lightly on its polished surface. A small smile played across his lips as his granddaughter's music surrounded him. This was a piece he knew intimately, had performed countless times on the world's greatest stages, yet hearing it, through Mia's interpretation, brought something fresh and moving to the familiar notes. The restaurant. Staff had stopped their work entirely. Busboys stood with trays half cleared. Bartenders paused mid-pour. The manager, who moments ago had been fretting about the disruption to service, now stood transfixed, a look of wonder replacing his earlier anxiety. As Mia played, her body swayed slightly with the music, her face transformed by deep concentration. Gone was the embarrassed waitress, replaced by a confident musician who understood exactly what she was doing. Her hands danced across the keys with precision and feeling, coaxing both thunder and whispers from the instrument. Harrington's business associates exchanged glances, their merger discussion completely forgotten. One of them, the younger man who had tried to intervene earlier, watched with undisguised amazement. The other two seemed stunned by the unexpected turn the evening had taken. A couple at a nearby table reached for each other's hands, moved by the beauty of the music. An elderly woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. A child who had been fidgeting throughout dinner sat perfectly still, captivated by the sounds filling the room. As the piece progressed to its more technically demanding passages, Mia's skill became even more apparent. Her fingers flew across the keys with seemingly impossible speed, yet each note rang clear and purposeful. This was no amateur performance. This was artistry of the highest caliber. Petrov opened his eyes and looked directly at Harrington as if to say, "Now do you understand?" Harrington met his gaze briefly, then returned his attention to Mia. Something in his expression had softened, the hard edges of privilege and power, momentarily smoothed by the universal language of music. The piece called for an orchestra to accompany the piano, but Mia played in such a way that the missing instruments weren't felt as an absence. Her interpretation made the solo piano sound complete, whole, as if Rachmaninoff himself had intended it to be played just this way, in this moment, in this room. As she approached a particularly moving passage, Petrov moved slowly to the bench and sat beside his granddaughter. Without interrupting her flow, he began to play the orchestral parts, his aged hands finding the perfect complementary notes. Together, they created a duet that filled the restaurant with sound so rich and complex that several guests gasped audibly. Grandfather and granddaughter played without looking at each other, connected by something deeper than sight, a musical understanding that transcended words. Their hands moved in perfect harmony, as if they had rehearsed this moment for years. In a way, perhaps they had. Harrington took a step closer to the piano, drawn by the music despite himself. His face revealed a complex mixture of emotions, wonder, memory, perhaps even a touch of regret. This was his mother's piano, playing his mother's favorite piece, but it had never sounded like this in his home. There it had sat largely silent after her passing, a beautiful but mute reminder of what he had lost. As the piece built toward its climax, Petrov's contributions became more pronounced, his experienced hands bringing out nuances that highlighted Mia's performance. Together they created something greater than either could have alone, the wisdom of age and the fire of youth combining in perfect balance. The restaurant had become a concert hall, The diners and audience transported from their expensive meals to a place beyond ordinary experience. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen, standing in a line by the service doors, their white uniforms bright under the dining room lights. When the final notes resonated through the room, there was a moment of complete silence, that magical pause after great music ends before the world rushes back in. It lasted one breath, two, three, then applause erupted from every corner of the restaurant. People rose to their feet, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. A few shouted, "Bravo!" A woman near the back wiped tears from her cheeks while continuing to applaud. Mia sat motionless for a moment, her hands still hovering above the keys, her breath coming quickly from the exertion and emotion of the performance. Petrov placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, leaning close to whisper something in her ear. She nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. Slowly, she stood and turned to face the room, giving a slight, humble bow to acknowledge the applause. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The response clearly overwhelmed her. This waitress who had just minutes before been humiliated in front of these same people. Harrington stood at the edge of the small crowd that had gathered around the piano. He made no move to approach, but he continued to watch Mia with an expression that had transformed completely from his earlier contempt. As the applause began to fade, he took a deep breath and stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly, creating a path between him and Mia. She straightened her shoulders, ready to face whatever came next. Petrov remained beside her, a protective presence despite his frail appearance. "Ms. Chen," Harrington said, his voice carrying clearly despite its quiet tone, "I owe you an apology." The restaurant grew quiet again, the drama of the evening continuing to unfold in unexpected ways. That was... Harrington paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "That was extraordinary, truly extraordinary." Mia nodded slightly, accepting his words without comment. "I misjudged you," he continued, "and I behaved inexcusably." He glanced at Petrov, then back to Mia. "Please accept my sincere apology." A murmur ran through the watching crowd. James Harrington was not known for apologies. Some of the regular patrons exchanged surprised glances, witnessing something they never expected to see. "Thank you, Mr. Harrington," Mia said simply. "Apology accepted." Petrov smiled slightly, approval in his eyes. Both for his granddaughter's grace and for Harrington's humility, however belated, Harrington wasn't finished. "Your grandfather mentioned your family's circumstances," he said, lowering his voice slightly, though in the hushed restaurant, many could still hear. "The medical bills, your siblings' education." Mia tensed visibly. "That's private family business, Mr. Harrington. I don't need—" "Of course," he interrupted quickly. "I'm not offering charity. That would be—" He glanced at Petrov again, seeming to search for guidance. "That would be presumptuous. Indeed it would." Petrov agreed mildly. Harrington nodded. "What I am offering is an opportunity. My foundation, the Harrington Family Foundation, sponsors young musicians, provides scholarships, performance opportunities, mentorship. We have connections with several symphony orchestras and music schools." Mia's expression remained guarded. "I appreciate the offer, but as I told my grandfather when he suggested similar arrangements, I don't want special treatment." "This wouldn't be special treatment," Harrington insisted. "It would be recognition of extraordinary talent, the kind of talent my mother would have wanted to support." He gestured toward the piano. "You've more than earned consideration based purely on merit." Before Mia could respond, the restaurant manager stepped forward, beaming with the delight of someone who has just witnessed his establishment become part of local legend. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, addressing the room at large, "what an unexpected honor to have both the legendary Anton Petrov and his gifted granddaughter perform for us tonight." He turned to Mia. "Ms. Chen, I believe you've just been promoted from waitress to our official house pianist. If you'll accept the position." "Of course." The offer was met with another round of applause from the diners. Mia looked stunned, glancing between the manager and her grandfather. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "I still need to support my family. The tips from waiting tables would be more than matched by your salary as our pianist," the manager finished for her. "Plus, the hours would allow you more time for your studies and practice." He glanced at Harrington, seemingly emboldened by the evening's events. "And perhaps," Mr. Harrington's foundation might consider establishing a regular scholarship fund for musicians who perform here. Harrington raised an eyebrow at the manager's boldness, but then nodded slowly. That could be arranged, he said. In fact, he paused thoughtful. In fact, we might consider naming it after your mother, he added, turning back to Mia. If that would be acceptable. Petrov's eyes twinkled. Life has a wonderful way of bringing things full circle, doesn't it? He said to no one in particular. A piano gifted in memory of one talented woman now opening doors for another. Mia looked at her grandfather, then at Harrington, then at the piano that had started this extraordinary chain of events. Her fingers, still warm from playing, tingled with the memory of the beautiful instrument's touch. I would be honored, she said quietly. The restaurant burst into applause once more. Harrington's business associates, who had watched the entire scene unfold with varying degrees of amazement, now approached to offer their own congratulations. The other waitstaff surrounded Mia, their earlier worry for her transformed into celebration. In the midst of it all, Harrington took a step back, watching as the young woman who had stood up to him was now surrounded by well-wishers. For the first time that evening, perhaps for the first time in many evenings, a genuine smile crossed his face. Petrov noticed. He made his way slowly to Harrington's side, leaning slightly on his cane. Music has a power that money cannot buy, Mr. Harrington, he said softly. It bridges gaps between people that seem unbridgeable. It reminds us of our common humanity. Harrington nodded, still watching Mia. Your granddaughter is remarkably talented. Yes, Petrov agreed, but her greatest talent isn't at the piano. Harrington looked at him questioningly. It's her ability to remain true to herself regardless of circumstance, Petrov explained. A rare quality in this world, wouldn't you agree? Before Harrington could answer, the manager approached them, practically bubbling with excitement. Mr. Harrington, Mr. Petrov, would you honor us by returning to your meals? The chef insists on preparing special desserts for everyone, on the house, to celebrate this remarkable evening. As they moved back toward their respective tables, the restaurant slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though nothing would be quite the same after what had transpired. Conversations resumed, but now they centered on the unexpected concert and its aftermath. Mia, excused from her waitressing duties for the remainder of the evening, sat at an empty table near the piano, surrounded by her co-workers. For once, she wasn't serving others. Tonight she had been served by music, by opportunity, by the unpredictable twists of fate that sometimes, just sometimes, turn humiliation into triumph. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night at the Golden Palm. The restaurant had changed in subtle but significant ways. The tables near the grand piano were now the most requested in the house, especially on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday evenings when Mia Chen performed. The waiting list for those tables stretched weeks in advance, with patrons willing to pay premium prices for the experience. The piano itself had been professionally restored to perfect condition. James Harrington had personally arranged for the best piano technicians in the country to work on it, ensuring that every key, string, and hammer functioned flawlessly. The instrument gleamed under the restaurant's lights, no longer just a showpiece but a living, breathing part of the establishment's identity. On this particular evening, the restaurant hummed with anticipation. It was the 6-month anniversary of what staff and regular patrons now referred to simply as the night. Rumors had circulated all week about something special planned to mark the occasion. Mia arrived early, as was her habit. She wore a simple but elegant black dress now instead of a waitress uniform. Her hair was styled in a neat updo, though a few strands had escaped. To frame her face, she had been practicing intensely all afternoon and hadn't had time for a touch-up. There she is, the manager said warmly, as Mia entered through the staff door. Our star attraction? Mia smiled but shook her head slightly at the description. Despite her changed circumstances, she had maintained the humility that defined her character. Success had not gone to her head. If anything, it had deepened her appreciation for the twists of fate that had brought her here. Is everything ready? She asked, glancing toward the main dining room. Absolutely. We're fully booked, as usual, and your special guests have confirmed their attendance. Mia nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness fluttering in her stomach. Tonight wasn't just any performance. Tonight represented something larger, a milestone in a journey that had begun with an accidental touch of piano keys and a billionaire's anger. As she made her way through the kitchen toward the dining area, kitchen staff called out greetings. The head chef, a serious man who rarely smiled, gave her a thumbs up from his station. Mia returned the gesture with a grateful nod. The entire staff had embraced her transition from waitress to pianist, taking pride in her success as if it were their own. In the main dining room, she paused for a moment to take in the scene. The restaurant looked magical in the soft evening light. White tablecloths glowed under carefully positioned lamps. Fresh flowers adorned each table. The murmur of conversation and occasional laughter created a pleasant backdrop to the gentle clinking of silverware and glasses. Her eyes were drawn to the piano, as always. But tonight something was different. Beside it stood a small table with what appeared to be framed documents and photographs. She moved closer, curious. The first frame contained a newspaper article from the day after the night, its headline reading, "Confrontation leads to concert. Waitress reveals extraordinary talent at the Golden Palm." There was a photo of Mia at the piano, her face captured in a moment of pure musical absorption. Next to it was a more recent article from a prestigious music magazine, featuring an interview with Anton Petrov about his return to public life and his role in the new Harrington Petrov Music Foundation. The photo showed Petrov and Harrington standing together at a formal event, both in tuxedos, looking like old friends rather than chance acquaintances. The third frame held the program from Mia's first formal recital 3 months ago, a sold-out performance at the city's premier concert hall. And beside that was something that made Mia's breath catch. A handwritten letter from Harrington's mother to a friend, dated some 30 years earlier, expressing her love for Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto and her dream that her son might someday use his resources to support young musicians. He found it in her personal effects, a familiar voice said from behind her. He'd never read it before. Mia turned to find her grandfather watching her with a gentle smile. Despite the late hour, Petrov looked energetic and much healthier than he had 6 months ago. His renewed involvement with music and the foundation had seemingly revitalized him. "Grandpa," Mia said, embracing him warmly, "I didn't expect you until later. And miss watching you prepare?" "Never." Petrov glanced at the display. "Harrington arranged this as a surprise for you. A timeline of transformation," he called it. Mia studied the collection with renewed interest. "It's incredible how one moment can change so many lives." "Not one moment," Petrov corrected gently. "One decision. Your decision to stand up for yourself with dignity rather than shrinking away. Everything that followed came from that seed." Before Mia could respond, the manager approached with barely contained excitement. "They're here," he said in a stage whisper. "All of them." Mia and Petrov turned to see a group being escorted to the largest table in the house, a special arrangement near the piano. Harrington was there, of course, looking more relaxed than Mia had ever seen him. Beside him walked a woman in her 70s who bore a striking resemblance to him. His aunt, Mia knew. His mother's only sister who had flown in specifically for tonight's event. Following them were Mia's brother and sister, both looking slightly overwhelmed by the upscale surroundings but beaming with pride. And behind them, in wheelchairs pushed by attentive nurses, came Mia's parents, their first public outing since the accident that had changed the family's life. Mia's hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "You didn't tell me they were coming," she whispered to her grandfather. Petrov's eyes twinkled. Some surprises are worth keeping. The group settled at their table. Harrington glanced up, saw Mia watching, and nodded in acknowledgement. The nod contained multitudes, respect, appreciation, perhaps even a touch of atonement for their first encounter. As the dining room filled with patrons, Mia took a few moments to center herself, running through her mental preparation routine just as her grandfather had taught her years ago. Tonight's program was special, a mix of classical pieces and original compositions, including one she had written specifically to commemorate the events that had brought them all to this point. At precisely 8 o'clock, the manager stepped to the center of the room and gently tapped a spoon against a crystal glass. The room gradually quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "welcome to the Golden Palm. 6 months ago, an extraordinary event took place in this very room, a moment that reminded us all about the power of music. the importance of dignity and the possibility of transformation. He gestured toward Mia. Tonight, we are honored to present Ms. Mia Chen, whose journey from our waitstaff to our headlining pianist has inspired us all. Applause filled the room as Mia made her way to the piano. She paused before sitting, taking a moment to look at the faces watching her. Her family, Harrington and his aunt, the regular patrons who had supported her from the beginning, even some of her former co-workers who had come to cheer her on. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said simply. 6 months ago, my fingers accidentally touched this piano, creating discord. Tonight, I hope to create something more harmonious. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her hands on the keys. The room fell silent in anticipation. Her first piece was Rachmaninoff, the same concerto she had played that fateful night, though tonight she performed a special arrangement that her grandfather had helped her create specifically for solo piano. As she played, she caught glimpses of the emotions on the faces around her. Her mother wiping away tears, Harrington's aunt leaning forward in her chair, Harrington himself sitting perfectly still, eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. When she finished the Rachmaninoff, the applause was warm and appreciative, but it was her second piece, an original composition titled Unexpected Turns, that truly captured the journey of the past 6 months. The music began with sharp, discordant notes representing conflict, then gradually transformed into something beautiful and resolute, finally resolving into a hopeful, forward-looking melody that brought many in the audience to tears. As the final notes faded, there was that magical moment of silence that follows truly moving music, the same silence that had fallen 6 months earlier. And then, just as before, applause erupted throughout the restaurant. Mia stood and bowed deeply, acknowledging the response with genuine gratitude. As she straightened, she saw Harrington rise from his seat and approach the piano, a small velvet box in his hand. "Ms. Chen," he said, his voice carrying easily in the now quiet room, "on behalf of the Harrington Petroff Music Foundation, I'd like to present you with this." He opened the box to reveal a simple but elegant pin, a golden treble clef studded with tiny diamonds. "This is the first of what will be an annual award," Harrington explained. "Not just to Mia, but to the entire room. The Grace Note Award, named for my mother, Grace Harrington. It will be presented each year to a musician who demonstrates not only exceptional talent, but also exceptional character." Mia accepted the box with shaking hands. "I'm honored," she said softly, "though there are many deserving musicians." "None who have taught me what you have," Harrington replied, his voice equally quiet. As he returned to his seat, Mia's grandfather approached the piano. Despite his age, Petrov moved with the straight-backed dignity of a performer who had graced the world's greatest stages. "If I may," he said. Gesturing to the bench beside Mia, she slid over, making room for him, just as they had done that first night. Together they began to play. Not Rachmaninoff this time, but a duet that Petrov had composed especially for this occasion. It wove together themes of challenge and perseverance, loss and discovery, discord and resolution. As they played, Mia glanced around the restaurant at the rapt faces of the audience. There was the couple who had been there on the night, now regular Thursday patrons. There was the chef, who had stepped out of the kitchen to listen. There was the young busboy who had recently started taking piano lessons himself, inspired by her story, and there, watching with undisguised emotion, was James Harrington, the man whose anger had nearly cost Mia her job but whose transformation had ultimately helped change the trajectory of her life. When the duet concluded, the entire restaurant rose in a standing ovation. Mia and Petrov stood together, bowing to acknowledge the response. "What happens next?" Mia whispered to her grandfather as they straightened from their bow. Petrov smiled, the wisdom of his years evident in his eyes. "We keep playing, my dear. We keep playing." Behind them, the piano gleamed in the restaurant's soft light, no longer just an expensive decoration or a painful reminder of loss, but a living instrument bringing beauty into the world. Just as it was always meant to do.